My husband told his mother in Korean that he got my best friend pregnant. They never once realized I understood every single word. I grew up in Koreatown in Los Angeles. Most of our neighbors were Korean, and the woman who looked after me when I was young, Mrs. Choi, spoke Korean with me every day. By the time I was 12, I could carry a conversation more comfortably than some people who had studied the language for years. It was never a secret I deliberately guarded. It was simply one part of my childhood that did not come up often once I became an adult. When I married Adrian 3 years ago, I never thought to make a formal announcement about it. After a while, the fact that he did not know seemed so ordinary that mentioning it would have felt strangely dramatic. The first time I met Adrian's parents, his mother made a comment in Korean about how American my cooking tasted. It was not cruel, exactly, but it was not meant for me to understand. I smiled, passed the rice, and continued eating. Mrs. Han looked pleased with herself, and Adrian never noticed anything unusual. That moment should probably have taught me something about the way his family used language when they wanted privacy in plain sight, but at the time, I let it go. I loved him. I wanted his parents to feel comfortable around me, and one careless remark about dinner did not seem worth turning into an issue. Adrian worked in technology and earned good money. His job demanded long hours, late meetings, and occasional weekends, or at least that was what he told me. I had shaped much of our married life around his schedule. I worked from home, kept the apartment running, and made myself available whenever he finally walked through the door. My closest friend, Camille, began coming over more often during those late nights. She would arrive with a bottle of wine, curl up beside me on the couch, and talk through movies we barely watched. We had known each other since high school. She had stood beside me at my wedding, held my bouquet while I fixed my veil, and cried when Adrian and I exchanged vows. There was no version of my life in which I imagined I needed to be suspicious of her. Thanksgiving was when everything changed. Adrian's parents had flown in from Chicago, and our apartment felt crowded in the way holiday homes often do. There were dishes everywhere, conversations overlapping, and people moving between the dining room and kitchen. I was standing at the sink after dinner, washing glasses while the others talked behind me. The water was running when I heard Mrs. Han lower her voice and ask Adrian in Korean, "When are you going to tell her?" My hands slowed, but I did not turn around. Adrian answered in the same language. "After the holidays, Camille is 12 weeks. For 1 second, I convinced myself I had heard him wrong. The faucet was loud, plates were clinking, and I wanted desperately for the sentence to mean anything else. Then his mother said, "This is a disaster. She seems like a good girl." Adrian replied, "She is. That's why I have to do this carefully. I don't want her walking away with everything." The glass in my hand slipped and struck the side of the sink hard enough to shatter. Everyone looked toward me. I stared at the broken pieces and blamed the soap. My hands were shaking, but somehow my face stayed still. I cleaned up the glass, finished washing the dishes, dried my hands, and carried dessert to the table as though my marriage had not ended in the space of 4 sentences. That night, after the apartment went quiet and everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my laptop. I did not confront Adrian. I did not wake Camille with a furious phone call. I created a new email address, opened a private folder, and began writing down exactly what I had heard while every word was still clear. The shock came later. In those first hours, I felt almost detached from my own body, as though the woman typing at the table was someone I was watching from across the room. For the first 2 days, grief found me only when I was alone. I cried in the shower with the water running so Adrian would not hear me. I lay awake at 3 in the morning while he slept beside me, breathing evenly, completely unaware that I knew. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the conversation until I could hear every pause. What hurt most was not only that he had gotten Camille pregnant. It was the calm way he had discussed managing me, as though my heartbreak were a financial problem to contain. He was not wondering how to tell his wife. He was calculating how to keep me from leaving with too much. After those first days, something in me changed. I did not suddenly become fearless, and I did not stop hurting. I simply became clear. If I confronted him without proof, he could deny what I had heard, delete messages, move money, and coordinate a story with Camille and his mother. I had spent 3 years trusting him. I was not going to spend the end of our marriage making it easier for him to deceive me. Over the weeks that followed, I became the version of the wife Adrian expected to see. I cooked his favorite meals and asked about his projects. I listened while he complained about deadlines, nodded at the right places, and kissed him goodbye in the morning. At night, I lay beside him and counted his breathing until I was certain he was asleep. Then I organized what I had gathered, checked account records, and documented every inconsistency I could verify. I spoke to a family attorney named Meredith Shaw and saved her number under a false name in my phone. On her advice, I opened a separate bank account at a branch far from Adrian's usual route and began protecting the money that was legally mine. I treated Camille with the same careful normality. I invited her to brunch and sat beside her while she scrolled through maternity clothes. I even hosted a small baby shower in my living room because that was already what she expected me to do. The decorations were soft blue, and the cake had 3 tiers because she had requested it in a voice message. In that same message, she said, "You are honestly the best friend I have. I don't know what I would do without you." I saved the recording. I did not know whether it would ever matter legally. I kept it because there were moments when I needed to hear her voice and remember that the betrayal was real, that I had not imagined the ease with which she sat across from me and accepted my kindness. Camille grew careless because she believed I knew nothing. One afternoon, she sat on my couch with one hand resting on her stomach and told me that the baby's father wanted to be involved but needed to handle his situation first. I kept my voice neutral and said that sounded responsible. Then I added, "He seems like a good man." Her eyes moved toward the wedding photograph on our mantel. "He really is," she said quietly. I smiled and poured her more tea. Inside, something cold settled deeper. She was not simply involved with my husband. She was using me as a safe place to talk about him while looking directly at the evidence of our marriage. I saved every text I could access, every receipt that did not match Adrian's explanation, and every date he claimed to be working late. When I noticed his car outside Camille's building during one of those supposed office nights, Meredith recommended that I hire a licensed private investigator rather than follow him myself. The investigator I chose was named Jordan Blake. She was calm, direct, and careful not to promise more than she could prove. 2 weeks later, she met me at a coffee shop downtown and placed a thick envelope on the table between us. Inside were photographs with timestamps, hotel bookings going back 8 months, and a record of Adrian's car outside Camille's apartment at 11:18 on a Tuesday night. Another photograph showed him leaving at 7:03 the following morning in the same jacket. The evidence did not create the truth. I had already heard the truth at my sink. It did something almost as important. It made the truth difficult for Adrian to rewrite. I paid Jordan in cash. As I gathered the envelope, she asked softly, "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said. And at that moment, I meant it. I was not all right in the way people usually mean. I was not peaceful or healed. But I knew what had happened. I knew what I needed to do next. And I was no longer trapped inside uncertainty. I copied everything and stored it in more than one place. The photographs, hotel confirmations, dates, account information, and messages were organized chronologically. Meredith reviewed the material and explained which parts were emotionally devastating and which parts were practically useful. She never promised that the law would punish Adrian for hurting me. She focused on the apartment, our finances, and the paperwork required to separate our lives. That realism helped. I did not need a fantasy in which a judge fixed everything. I needed a plan that Adrian could not quietly dismantle. By the time I decided to reveal what I knew, I had already filed the necessary papers. I chose a public dinner not because I wanted a spectacle, but because Adrian and his mother had already discussed controlling the story. I wanted both families to hear the same facts at the same time. I wanted Camille there. Most of all, I wanted witnesses, so no one could later claim that I had misunderstood a conversation or acted without evidence. The week before Christmas, I invited everyone to an Italian restaurant downtown. I gave each person a different reason to come. I told my parents that I wanted to celebrate the holidays early. I told Adrian's parents that I had planned a surprise for their son. I texted Camille, "I really need you tonight. Please come." To Adrian, I said I had booked the restaurant to celebrate our anniversary a few weeks early. No one questioned me because, for weeks, I had given them no reason to. The reservation was for 7, but I arrived at 6:15. I spoke with the host and adjusted the seating so I could face both the entrance and the hallway, leading to the restrooms. The restaurant was called Bellucci's, the same place Adrian had taken me for our first anniversary. I remembered sitting across from him there while he asked me to close my eyes before giving me a necklace. Back then, I had believed I had married a thoughtful, steady man. Now I sat at the same kind of table with legal documents in my purse and a message from Jordan on my phone telling me that every file was organized if I needed it. My parents arrived first. My mother wore the beige coat I had given her the previous year, and my father carried an umbrella even though it was not raining. My mother smiled as she sat down and asked, "What are we celebrating?" "Being together," I said. Adrian's parents arrived a few minutes later. Mrs. Hahn scanned the table before smiling, while Mr. Hahn remained close beside her. When I poured water into Mrs. Hahn's glass, she looked directly at me. I held her gaze. She looked away first. Camille arrived at 7:05 in a dark green dress that made her pregnancy unmistakable. The gold earrings I had given her for her birthday caught the light when she leaned in to hug me. "How are you?" she whispered. "Good," I said. "Sit next to me." Mrs. Hahn's expression tightened for a fraction of a second, but Camille did not notice. Adrian came in last, 12 minutes late, adjusting his jacket as he crossed the room. He smiled when he saw me. That smile had once made me feel safe. He greeted everyone, sat on my left, and complained about traffic. Then he placed his hand over mine on the table. I let it remain there. The waiter took our orders, and small talk filled the space while we waited. My father told a story about a neighbor's tree falling across the sidewalk. My mother asked about Christmas plans. Adrian leaned back and talked confidently about a product update his team had launched that week. Everyone laughed at the expected moments. He looked completely relaxed because he believed he was still in control. Camille touched my arm. You are quiet tonight. Is everything okay? I'm just thinking about how to start, I replied. Start what? There is something I want to share with everyone, I said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. Let's wait until the food comes. My mother looked curious. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Hahn stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. When the plates had arrived and the waiter walked away, I lifted my wine glass. I would like to make a toast. Everyone raised a glass. Camille lifted sparkling water. To the things you learn when you stop pretending you don't know them. There was a pause. My mother said, "Cheers," gently, and my father echoed her. The others followed, though no one sounded certain. Adrian drank without looking away from me. Camille did not drink at all. I set down my glass, opened my purse, and removed 6 identical envelopes. I placed one in front of each person, beginning with my parents, then Adrian's parents, then Adrian, and finally, Camille. No one reached for them immediately. You won't understand what is inside yet, I said. Let me explain first. The restaurant continued around us. Plates clinked, music played softly, and strangers carried on conversations at nearby tables. At ours, the air seemed to stop moving. I grew up in Koreatown, I began. Mrs. Choi, the woman who cared for me when I was young, was Korean. She taught me the language when I was a child. By the time I was 12, I was fluent. Mrs. Hahn's fingers tightened around her napkin. When I married Adrian, I never mentioned it because it did not seem important. On Thanksgiving, while I was washing dishes, I heard a conversation in Korean. I turned toward Mrs. Hahn. You asked your son when he planned to tell me. He said after the holidays. He said Camille was 12 weeks pregnant. No one moved. You said this was a disaster and that I seemed like a good girl. Adrian answered that I was, and that was why he had to handle it carefully. He said he did not want me walking away with everything. My father slowly put down his fork. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she did not interrupt. Camille's face lost its color. Adrian's hand remained on the table, though it was no longer touching mine. I have spent the week since Thanksgiving documenting everything, I continued. The envelopes contain copies of photographs, hotel records, messages, dates, and the legal paperwork I already filed. Adrian finally spoke. Natalie, wait. No, I said, my voice steady. Let them read. My father opened his envelope first. He handled each page carefully, the way he handled anything serious. I watched his expression change when he reached the photographs. He did not say a word. He simply looked at Adrian. My mother read every page more slowly. When she reached the hotel confirmations, she closed the envelope and pressed her lips together. Mr. Hahn opened his next. After reading the first page, he passed it to his wife without comment. Mrs. Hahn read in silence, her jaw tightening. Camille opened hers last and pulled out the documents one at a time. There were screenshots of messages, confirmations from 3 hotels, the photograph of Adrian entering her building late at night, and the photograph of him leaving the next morning. She placed everything back on the table with shaking hands. Natalie, she began. Not yet. She stopped. Adrian had still not opened his envelope. I looked at him. Go ahead. He stared at me for a long second before tearing it open. He did not need to read every page. He recognized the dates, the locations, and the images. Silence settled completely over the table. I filed 3 weeks ago, I said. You were served through your attorney yesterday. The process has already started. My mother turned toward him. Is it true? He hesitated. That hesitation answered before he did. His father repeated the question more firmly. Is it true? Yes, Adrian said at last. He looked down at the table when he said it. My father pushed his plate away, as though he could no longer stand having food in front of him. Mrs. Hahn spoke in careful English. I did not think it would happen like this. You knew, I said. She did not deny it. Camille's voice shook. I didn't know you understood Korean. That was never the real problem, I replied. When were you going to tell me that the father of your baby was my husband? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That is the problem. Adrian leaned forward. This should not be happening here. We can talk privately. It already happened privately, I said, for 8 months. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had seen many times whenever he felt cornered. My father did not look at him again. He looked at me and asked, What do you need from us tonight? It was the first question anyone asked that centered what I needed, rather than what Adrian wanted to explain. I need everyone to know the truth, I said. I do not want a different version of this story circulating later. My father nodded once. I reached into my purse and removed one final folded document. I placed it in front of Adrian. You have until Friday to respond through your attorney. His eyes narrowed. So you decided everything already? Yes, 3 weeks ago. Without talking to me? You had 8 months to talk to me. He had no answer. Mr. Hahn made a quiet sound under his breath, somewhere between a sigh and an acknowledgement. I stood, smoothed my coat, and told the table that dinner had already been paid for. My mother rose immediately, and my father followed. We walked toward the exit without rushing. Just before I reached the door, Adrian called after me. That's it? You're just leaving? I stopped but did not turn around. I'm leaving, I said. The difference is that I'm doing it on my terms. Then I stepped outside. The December air was cold against my face. My mother took one arm, my father walked on the other side, and none of us spoke for nearly half a block. Finally, my mother asked where I was staying. "With you," I said, "if that is all right." "Your room is exactly the way you left it," she replied. For the first time since Thanksgiving, my hands were no longer shaking. I stayed at my parents' house for 4 days. My childhood bedroom smelled of clean laundry and old wood, and although the bed was smaller than the one I had shared with Adrian, I slept better than I had in months. There was no breathing to count and no ceiling to stare at while pretending everything was normal. On the first day, I barely spoke. My mother brought me coffee and made breakfast without pushing me to explain myself. My father came home around 6, and the three of us ate dinner while discussing ordinary things: a television series, a neighbor's badly painted house, and plans for the weekend. No one said Adrian's name. Their silence was not avoidance. It was permission for me to exist somewhere I did not have to perform strength. On the second day Adrian called, I let it ring. His text arrived immediately. "We need to talk." I replied with Meredith Shaw's phone number and nothing else. 10 minutes later, he asked, "Is this really how you want to handle it?" I did not answer. He had spent 8 months making decisions about our marriage without including me. Now that I had taken control of the process, he suddenly wanted a conversation about fairness. Camille called that afternoon and left a message. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to explain." I listened once and deleted it. I had questions, but any explanation would have served her need to reduce her guilt. She needed to speak. I did not need to listen. Everything that mattered had already been said at the restaurant. On Thursday, I met Meredith in her office. She was in her early 50s, with short dark hair, sharp eyes, and no tolerance for wasted motion. A college friend had recommended her as someone who did not flinch, and that description had been accurate. She told me Adrian had hired an attorney named Thomas Lee and was challenging my claim to the apartment because he said he had provided the down payment. I reminded her that I had paid the rent for almost 3 years while Adrian saved money for a startup that never happened. She asked whether I had records. I did. Meredith explained that documentation gave us leverage, not magic. If Adrian cooperated, the divorce might be resolved in about 6 weeks. If he fought every issue, it would take longer. People who were accustomed to control, she said, either conceded when they saw they were cornered or resisted because losing authority frightened them. Adrian had always functioned well when he believed he was steering everything. When a situation moved beyond him, he scrambled. I left with a list of documents to gather and stopped at a cafe before returning to my parents' house. I pictured Adrian meeting his attorney, trying to build a version of the story in which he was not completely responsible. I pictured Camille waiting to learn whether the man who had promised her a future would actually make room for her. I expected rage. Instead, I felt release. Their choices still affected me, but I was no longer responsible for managing their emotions or repairing the future they had damaged. The next morning, my mother brought 2 mugs of coffee into my room and asked how the legal meeting had gone. I told her we were on track. Then she carefully mentioned Camille for the first time since the dinner. Adrian's betrayal had a legal structure: husband, affair, divorce. Camille's betrayal was harder to define. She had accepted my tea, my help, and a baby shower while carrying my husband's child. There was no form to file for the loss of a friendship. "I'm not trying to process that part yet," I said. "I'm not forcing it." "It doesn't have to be resolved this week," my mother replied. Later that day, Mrs. Hahn sent a brief message. She wrote that what had happened was wrong, that she would not ask me to understand, and that she wanted me to know she recognized it. I read the message twice. I did not reply, but I did not delete it either. Her acknowledgement did not erase her silence, yet it was the first statement from Adrian's family that did not ask me to make someone else feel better. That evening, I returned to the apartment during a 2-hour window Meredith had arranged while Adrian was away. I followed a written list: clothes, personal documents, books I had owned before the marriage, 2 framed prints from my 20s, and the espresso maker my grandmother had given me. Everything else could be divided properly later. It took 50 minutes. Before leaving, I stood in the living room and looked at our wedding photograph on the mantel, the same one Camille had glanced at while calling Adrian a good man. I left it there. The marriage had mattered, but the photograph no longer represented a life I wanted to carry with me. The following Tuesday, I found a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. It was 8 blocks from a new job and 20 minutes by train from my parents. It was small, affordable, and mine. I signed the lease that week. The job had not arrived by accident. While documenting the affair, I had also updated my resume, contacted former colleagues, and applied for positions Adrian knew nothing about. I had studied design before marriage, but gradually shifted into remote work because it made our household more convenient for him. During one interview, I was asked why I had stepped away from the field. I did not tell them my life story. I said, "I'm ready to return." They called 4 days later. I started on a Monday. The first month was practical chaos: new systems, unfamiliar clients, and expectations I had to learn quickly. It was difficult, but it was a difficulty I could solve by focusing. My supervisor, Denise Carter, was direct and organized. She corrected mistakes without humiliating anyone and expected people to ask questions before small problems became large ones. After months of secrecy at home, clarity felt like a luxury. The week I signed the lease, Meredith called. Adrian had agreed to the main terms, including my claim to the apartment, but he had already moved money from our joint account. The transfer was documented and not large enough to change the case, but it confirmed why I had needed to prepare before confronting him. Of course he did, I said. Meredith asked how I felt, ready for it to be over. That evening, I shopped for the new apartment. I chose sheets Adrian would have called impractical, a small rug, and 2 plants I was not sure I could keep alive. On the first night, I had no couch, so I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. There was nothing dramatic about the room. For months, quiet had meant lying beside a man who was deceiving me. In that apartment, quiet felt like space. The couch came 2 weeks later. I had met Sabrina Wells in an online design course I started during the weeks of planning. She was a 35-year-old graphic designer who had lived alone since she was 28 and spoke of independence as a choice, not a consolation prize. When I gave her the short version of my situation, she did not look at me as though I were fragile. She said, "Rebuilding is uncomfortable. That doesn't mean it's wrong." Sabrina came with me to choose the couch. I caught myself several times wondering whether Adrian would dislike a color, then reminded myself that his opinion was irrelevant. I chose a deep navy couch. We assembled it incorrectly the first time, fixed it, and ate pizza straight from the box. "How does it feel?" Sabrina asked. "Like it's mine." It is. The divorce was finalized in 5.5 weeks, faster than expected. Meredith called on a Tuesday and said Adrian had signed everything. Toward the end, he had become calmer, perhaps because he understood there was little left to argue. I did not cry or celebrate. It felt like finishing the cleaning of a room that had been cluttered for years. Not happiness, order. Work began asking more of me. In May, Denise assigned me a mid-sized office renovation with a 3-month timeline and a 4-person team under my coordination. I made small mistakes during the first week, but by the third, the client approved our initial designs without revisions. One Friday, Denise told me the client had asked who was managing the project. "Is that bad?" I asked. "No, they said you respond faster than anyone they have worked with." The compliment was small, but it mattered. For years, so much of my energy had gone into making Adrian's life easier that I had forgotten what it felt like to be recognized for work that belonged to me. I began eating dinner at my parents' house on Fridays. At first, I went because I needed support. Later, I went because I wanted to. My father cooked too much. My mother asked about work, and we talked about ordinary things. One evening, sitting in the chair I had claimed as a teenager, I thought about Thanksgiving again. The conversation at the sink had lasted perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds redirected my life because I understood a language Adrian assumed I did not. Mrs. Choi had started teaching me Korean when I was 8 because she believed children should grow up bilingual when they had the opportunity. By 12, I spoke comfortably. For years, it had been a quiet skill in the background. Then it became the reason I learned the truth before Adrian could package it into a version designed for me. In early spring, Sabrina forwarded a message asking whether I knew Adrian had lost his job. Later that night, I checked his professional profile. It said he was exploring new opportunities after a transition. A major project he led had failed during rollout, and the client had terminated the contract. A short industry article named him as team lead. I closed the page. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. Adrian performed well when everything was smooth. Under pressure, he looked for someone else to blame. I had been part of that system longer than I understood. Camille contacted me twice in January. I never answered, and by March the messages stopped. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard Adrian had not moved in with her. They remained in contact because of the pregnancy, but lived separately, and she had moved into a smaller apartment. When my mother told me, I realized I felt neutral. Their relationship was no longer mine to understand or fix. In April, I received an email from Dana Foster, a woman who had dated Adrian 2 years before he met me. She did not want drama or friendship. She only wanted me to know that what happened to me had not begun with me. We met for coffee. In 20 minutes, she described different details with the same pattern. Adrian managed perceptions, controlled the narrative, and left when it suited him. "I'm not telling you so you hate him more," she said. "I just wish someone had told me I wasn't crazy." "I already reached that conclusion," I said, "but I appreciate it." A week later, Dana learned about another woman between our relationships, Paige Turner. The 3 of us met at Dana's apartment and compared timelines. There was no shouting and no revenge plan. By the end of the evening, the pattern was undeniable. "What bothers me most," Paige said, "is how organized he was about lying." "He's less organized now," I replied, and told them he had lost his job. No one celebrated, but no one pretended the information meant nothing. Adrian's system depended on secrecy, stability, and other people accepting his version of reality. Once those things failed, he did not know what to do. In June, Denise called me into her office. Our company had secured a Korean hotel group expanding into the United States. and the client wanted someone who could coordinate directly with its team in Seoul. Denise pointed to the language section of my resume. You listed Korean. Would you be willing to travel? Yes, I answered before she finished the question. 2 weeks later, I was on a 14-hour flight with project materials in my bag. 4 members of the local team met me in Seoul, a director, 2 architects, and a coordinator. When I greeted them in Korean, the director looked surprised. Your Korean is strong. I grew up in Koreatown. The meetings were structured and direct. Expectations were clear, questions were answered, and no one used language to hide meaning from someone else in the room. I worked well there. On my second weekend, I walked through a quiet neighborhood of traditional houses and checked my phone while sitting on a low wall. Sabrina had sent proof that one of my plants was alive. My mother had sent a photograph of dinner. Adrian had sent a message beginning, I know you don't have to respond. I just wanted to say, I deleted it without reading further. Not from anger, from clarity. There was nothing in the message I needed. On the flight home, I wrote 3 goals for the next project phase, closed my notebook, and slept without replaying a single conversation. When I returned, my apartment felt aligned rather than merely new. I placed ceramic cups from Insadong on a shelf, hung an ink illustration above my desk, and watered both plants, which had somehow survived. The hotel project moved into detailed planning with late calls, floor plans, material approvals, and budget adjustments. It demanded focus, and I gave it focus. Sabrina came over one Thursday with takeout and wine. She looked around and said, It feels settled. It does. Are you really okay? I considered the question. I'm not broken. I'm adjusting. Some nights were still quiet enough to press against my chest. I missed the idea of partnership at times. Shared meals, another person moving through the apartment in the morning, a familiar voice at the end of the day. But I did not miss Adrian. That difference mattered. In July, I saw Camille in a grocery store. She was heavily pregnant and looked exhausted. We stood in the cereal aisle under fluorescent lights. 2 women who had once believed they knew everything about each other. Hi, she said. Hi. She asked how I was. I said I was busy and asked the same. She said she was tired. I did not ask about Adrian, and she did not volunteer anything. Finally, she said, I'm sorry. I believed she was sorry, but regret was not repair. I hope everything goes smoothly, I said, meaning the pregnancy. We did not hug or promise to talk. We walked in opposite directions. In my car, I realized the meeting had not reopened anything. It confirmed that the friendship we had before Thanksgiving was gone. In August, Meredith confirmed that the final transfers had cleared. There were no joint accounts, shared property, or remaining obligations. Around the same time, Mrs. Han wrote, My son is struggling. I am not asking for forgiveness. I only hope you are well. For the first time, I replied, I am well. I hope you are too. It was not reconciliation. It was closure. One afternoon, Denise told me the Seoul team had requested me specifically for the next phase. They trust you, she said. Trust had become complicated in my personal life, but professionally it was clean. It had been earned through preparation and consistency. I'll take it. That fall, the project was featured in a small industry newsletter. My parents clipped the article and placed it on their refrigerator. Sabrina sent a screenshot with 3 exclamation points. I did not send it to Adrian. The thought did not occur to me until later, and realizing that felt like progress. In October, I sat on the Navy couch and thought about the woman at the sink the previous Thanksgiving. Her hands had shaken while her face remained calm. She could have confronted Adrian immediately. Instead, she stayed still long enough to build a plan. I did not romanticize her pain or believe silence was always strength. I respected her because she chose clarity over chaos. She protected evidence, sought legal advice, secured money, found work, and left before Adrian could control the ending. In November, almost 1 year after Thanksgiving, a mutual acquaintance sent a birth announcement. Camille had delivered a baby boy. I stared at the message, then placed my phone down. I felt no anger and no grief, only distance. The chapter had not been erased, but it was closed. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner in my apartment for my parents and Sabrina. I cooked traditional American dishes and one Korean dish Mrs. Choi had taught me years earlier. We ate at my table, laughed without anyone lowering their voice to hide a secret, and stayed over dessert until the room grew warm. My father looked around and said, You built this. He did not mean the furniture, he meant the life. After everyone left, I stacked the dishes in the sink. 1 year earlier, a kitchen had been the place where my marriage ended. I turned on the faucet and let the water run over my hands. This time, they did not shake. I had understood every language spoken in that room. More importantly, I finally understood myself.